Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to talk to you guys about makeup brushes. So this is something I get a lot of questions about from friends, from clients, from subscribers. Which brushes are for what? So I'm going to run through the different types of brushes, what they're meant to be used for, and some other uses that you might have for them. So I'm going to say right here and now, when it comes to brushes, there are no rules. If you find that you want to use a certain brush for blush and it's made for highlight, that's fine. It's totally fine. You can certainly do that. This is just meant to help you determine which brushes are for what and maybe help you sort of up your game in terms of blending, placement, things like that. So let's get started, and we'll start with foundation brushes. So I have three types of foundation brushes here to talk to you guys about. The first one is this is a Luxie 660 Precision Foundation Brush. Looks like this. It's about the size of a blush brush, but it's a bit flatter than you would typically see with a blush brush or a bronzer brush. It is called a precision foundation brush, so it is made for foundation. However, I find this size to be a little small, and I like something a little bit flatter to apply my foundation personally. So what I like to use this type of a brush for is actually concealer. I like to use it to pat my concealer in underneath my eye. Because it's got that flat shape, I find I can really get in there and sort of pat it in. I really like to use a brush like this that way. However, it can be used also for foundation. A foundation brush that probably most people are familiar with is this sort of flat paintbrush style foundation brush. So this is the Luxie 510 foundation brush. It looks like a paintbrush, essentially. It's synthetic fibers. Most, if not all, of my brushes at this point are synthetic fiber, but that's just a personal preference on my end. However, most of the time with this type of brush, they will have synthetic fibers. Quite often with brushes that are meant to be used with cream products, quite often they will be made from synthetic fibers. Now, this is a more standard foundation brush. This is the type of foundation brush that I would have used when I was in school for makeup. But I personally don't love a brush like this. So it's meant to be sort of painted on the skin, and then you would bounce it in with either a beauty blender or a sponge of some kind. I personally use this brush to apply a mask. So you can use your brushes for anything. And then there's more of the flat top kabuki style foundation brush. So this is the Luxie 532 round top blender. So this one has a bit of a dome shape to it. You can also find brushes similar to this that have a flatter top on it, and that just depends on how you like to apply your foundation. If you like to sort of buff it in, or if you rather just pat it in. I have quite a few of these style of foundation brushes. This is my preference to apply my foundation. So I usually just dot a little bit of foundation on all the areas of my face, and then I sort of stipple it in with the brush, and then when it's mostly blended, then I'll start sort of buffing it in circular motions. Powder brushes. So everybody has a powder brush. If you've ever bought a roll of makeup brushes or a set of makeup brushes, it's the largest brush in the set. So I've got a couple of different types here. This is a Moda brush, and it's very large, very fluffy. It has a little bit of a narrower side and a wider side. So you apply powder with it. I mean, there's not a whole lot more to say about it. You can also find this style that are a bit, a little less dense, a little bit floppier, but still quite large and has that sort of domed shape. So those are some brushes that would be intended to use for powder all over the face. This brush is an e.l.f. brush. This is the Flawless Face Brush from e.l.f. This would be one that you could use for foundation, for powder. I like to use this one for bronzer. So when I want to get a less precision application, more of a sort of blown out, subtle bronze, I'll use something fluffy like this. Rather than really contouring with it, I'm kind of just fluffing it around to create a little bit of darkness, a little bit of contouring around the face without really getting in and chiseling. So this type of a brush is very multi-purpose, and you could certainly use a powder brush in that same way, depending on how large your face is, depending on how blown out you want the bronzer to look. Keeping in with the topic of bronzer, here's a couple of other brushes. So you could certainly also use a blush brush if you want something a little bit smaller than this one here that I just showed you. You could certainly use a blush brush for a bronzer. I also really like to use this one. This is the Luxie Small Contouring Brush, the 512. It's sort of a flat top. It's densely packed. But it's made for contouring. So when I want to chisel in my cheekbones a little bit more or really cut in along the jawline, this is the brush that I use. I quite like it for that purpose. I usually use this for bronzer. If I'm going to actually go in and contour, I do have a different brush that I like to use for that, but you could use this for both things, bronzer, contour, and because it has that nice flatter top on it, you can sort of chisel it in and then buff it to really make sure you've got those edges blended out. This brush here, I don't know what it's called. I want to say it's called, it's an e.l.f. brush, and I want to say it's something to do with sculpting or chiseling or something like that. But this brush here is a very unique shape, as you can see. Hello, my sweet, handsome boy. I'm on the floor, so Charlie's coming for kisses. Oh, hello. Are you gonna knock all my brushes around? Those are not for you. So this is a brush that you would use. Hello. So back to the brushes. A brush like this would be used to sort of chisel in areas that you really want to contour. So the shape of this is meant to sort of hug the cheekbone area and really contour. So I would use this brush specifically to contour, where I would use something like these two that I've already shown you to bronze, to create a little bit more of a blown out look, where this is really going to give you that solid line. You could even apply the line with a brush like this and then use something like this to buff it in so you've got a nice blend. Moving on to blush, I've got 4 brushes here that are considered to be blush brushes. Actually, this one here, this is the Luxie 522 tapered highlighter brush. I actually use this daily for a blush brush. I find it to be a little bit large personally for highlight, but I find it to be the perfect size for blush because I like to kind of pat on my blush and then buff it in, if that makes sense. So something like this, about this size, for me and my face shape, seems to work very well. A more standard blush brush that you would see in a makeup brush set is something like this. It's a little bit larger, still has sort of flatter on one side, wider on the other. This one here is a natural bristle brush. I actually use this one to like sweep the fallout from underneath my eyes when I'm doing my eye makeup, but this would actually be considered a blush brush and would certainly work for that purpose. A couple of other ones that I have here. This is a Moda brush. It is made for blush or highlight. It's quite a bit more flexible. It's very floppy, not densely packed at all. This would be good to apply a very subtle amount of blush or highlight if you didn't want it to be very pigmented or very concentrated in one area. You could use something very soft like this to sort of sweep the product on. And then I have a duo fiber brush. I did want to mention this because I know sometimes these will come in sets. So this is the Luxie 516 duo fiber brush, and you can see there are sort of some dark, densely packed bristles down here at the bottom, and then the white ones on the top are a little bit more sparse and fluffy. So cream products have gotten very popular over the last year or so. I think we're going to see that trend stick around for a while, and this is a brush that comes in handy when you're doing cream products. So if you were looking to use a cream blush, a duo fiber brush would be a great option if you don't want to use your finger or a beauty blender to apply that. Something like this, you're not going to get too much product on the end because there's so few bristles at the very end, and because you've got the densely packed bristles down here, you can kind of stipple it on and then buff it in. Highlight brushes. So I've got a few different ones here. Two of them are quite similar. So these would be my favorite highlighting brushes. These are both by SL Miss Glam. I've got the SG62 and the L36. These are both highlighting brushes. They're about the same shape as like a blush brush, only a little bit smaller. So these are the brushes that you would use to apply your highlight to this area, end of your nose, down the bridge of your nose. Sometimes I'll hit this area. These are the brushes that I personally like to use for highlight. Another couple of options here, I've got an e.l.f. one. It's just called the e.l.f. highlighting brush. It's a little bit more tapered, a little bit more densely packed. So if I want to get a little bit more of a precision application and also a more concentrated application, I would use a brush like this. It's going to apply a lot more product because the brush isn't as fluffy. And then lastly, some people like to apply a highlight with a fan brush. Everybody gets one of these in a makeup brush set, and most people don't know what it's for. So a lot of people do like to highlight with a brush like this. It's going to give you a little bit of a softer application than something like this that's a little bit more tapered. You're going to pick up a lot more product on a brush like this than you are on something like this. So if you've got a really blinding highlight and you just want a soft application, a little dusting with a fan brush is probably all you need. So that is the purpose most people will use. Hello there. Oh, whoa. Oh, sweet boy. So that's what most people will use a fan brush for. You can also use it to sweep fallout from underneath the eyes. I have also seen people apply blush with it. If you, again, have a very pigmented blush and you want to apply it a little bit more sparingly, something like this will allow you to do that because you're not going to pick up very much product on a fan brush. Unless it's a fan brush like this. This is a Giant. This is a really old MAC brush. I never use this. Once in a while when I'm doing makeup applications for an event, I will use it to like sweep a whole bunch of glitter off the face. But I have also seen people use it for contour. I personally find something like this much too large. So if you have something like this and you can't find a use for it, you're not alone. Concealer brushes. So I mentioned earlier that this particular foundation brush, I like to use it for concealer. These two brushes are specifically made for concealer. They are both dirty. I am so sorry. So the first one is the Bedhead Rockin' brush. So you can see this one comes to a point. It's a very interesting shape. I've actually never seen another brush exactly like this, but it is for concealer and it's made so that you can really get into that corner with the point. More typically you will see a concealer brush like this. It's just sort of round shaped, flat, synthetic bristles, and very densely packed. So I will use this to apply my concealer before I blend it out with something larger like this or a sponge. Something like this also comes in really handy to like carve out your eyebrow. If you've boo-booed on your eyebrow a little bit, you can really kind of follow the contour of your eyebrow with a brush like this. Something like this is also very helpful if you'd like to go in and cut the crease to do an eyeshadow look, to apply some concealer down the middle to do a halo eye, and even to spot conceal all over your face if you don't want to go right on the blemish with your doe foot applicator of your concealer. I've got another sort of unique one here that I thought I'd touch on. This is the Luxie 680 Pro Precision Face Brush. This one I believe is meant for contouring. I find it again to be a little bit large for me for that area, and it's very densely packed. But what I like to use this brush for is to load it up with powder and then press that powder in underneath my eyes to set my concealer. Again, you can use your brushes however you like. If you find a way, like I found this one way that I love to use this brush, and even though it doesn't seem like a super important part of my makeup routine, I use this every single day for that purpose, and I love it. Everybody has a spoolie in their makeup kit. If you don't have a brush independently for it, you have it on the back of an eyebrow brush. So obviously you can use this to brush out your eyebrows. You can use it to comb through your lashes. If you've got too much mascara on, you can use this to sort of comb a little bit of the extra out. I do that quite often on like a no makeup day. I'll apply my mascara and then I'll comb through with a spoolie to sort of calm it down a little bit because I don't want it to look like I've got a lot of makeup on. Another great purpose for these spoolies is if you get mascara on like your nose when you're applying your makeup. We've all been there. Or you've sneezed right after you put your mascara on. Happens to me all the time. So the trick with that is to not try and immediately wipe it away. You let it dry and then you take a spoolie and you just sort of scratch it off. Can't live without this, if only for that reason. So now we're getting into the eye brushes, which I think is what most people struggle with the most because there's so many different ones, so many different shapes and sizes. But if you really look at them, there's only a handful really and truly of different shapes. They're often just different sizes of the same few shapes. So first I want to talk about crease brushes. I have an addiction to crease brushes. I love them so much. I use one every single day. So this is the brush that you're going to use to lay down the foundation of your eye look. So when you're putting your transition color into the crease, you want something fluffy, you want something dome shaped, and you want something that's gonna buff the product in without applying too much of it. So here are some examples of that. I've got doubles of this one. So I've got two of these. This is the Luxie 250 large eye blending brush. You can see it's dome shaped, big, fluffy, round. It doesn't have a flat side on it. I've got a couple of other ones that are a little bit fluffier, not so densely packed. So these ones are great for sort of the initial application, where something like this, because it's a little bit denser, I'll go in with a brush like this, windshield wiper motions, apply my transition color into my crease. And then I might take a little bit more of a densely packed brush like this and sort of buff out the edges to really make sure that there's no harsh lines. So very important to have a crease brush. I also have a smaller one here. This is the Luxie 229 tapered blending brush. This one's a little bit smaller in size to the other ones I've already shown you. So sometimes it is nice to have something a little bit smaller, but again, it's still not very densely packed. It's still very fluffy compared to some of the others that I'm going to show you here in a minute. I do have one other type of brush that I like to use in the crease. This is the Luxie 209 large shader. So you can see it's a very large brush. It's very densely packed. It's still quite fluffy, but it's wider on one side than it is on the other. So sometimes you just want to be able to kind of go in hard with that transition color, and something like this maybe is a little bit too fluffy. You still want to cover a good surface area. So I'll use something like this and I'll turn it kind of flat side. I'll kind of use it horizontally and kind of pack things into the crease. I find a brush like this to be quite useful. Then we get more into the category of like flat shader brushes. There's sort of two different categories of that same type of brush. So first I want to talk to you about the softer, fluffier ones. So I've got a few examples of that here. So this one is sort of a little bit fluffier, but you can see that it's got a flatter shape. This one here is quite a bit smaller. Again, it has that flat, rounded shape. I'm trying to show you the shapes so that you can start associating the shape with what they're for. I don't know if this is helpful. I hope it is. This is sort of a shorter version of that same thing. This is like a longer version of that same thing. So you recognize the shape. Same kind of thing here. It's a little bit fluffier version of that same kind of thing. So these brushes are made for shadow placement. So this type of a brush, I'll grab one that's not quite so dirty. This type of a brush is made to be used to pack eyeshadows on. So you're going to use this for your lid color in general. You're not going to try and take something like this into the crease because it's just not shaped in a way that is sort of ergonomic to that area. So something like this is going to be very good because of the shape of it, because it has that rounded top on it. It's going to be great for patting on eyeshadows. So you're going to use this more often for your eyelid, not your crease. I would use these obviously to pack on my initial color. These are also great for applying metallic eyeshadows to really pack them on. So different sizes for different things. I like to use something smaller like this one here to highlight in the inner corner, maybe hit underneath the eyebrow bone to highlight that area. And then the other type is these more precision small shader brushes. So I've got one from Alamar and I've got the Luxie 245 small shader. So these are quite a bit smaller, similar in shape. I'm just going to grab one to show you. Similar in shape to the ones that I showed you before, but they're much smaller. They're much more densely packed. They're almost always synthetic bristles, and you can see that it's quite a bit narrower this way than it is this way. So something like this I would use to apply liquid eyeshadows, liquid glitter shadows like the Stila Glitter and Glow eyeshadows. I would use this to cut the crease. I've used these for concealer, more precision concealer work, carving in the eyebrow. If you are somebody who likes to use metallic shadows with setting spray to wet it down, this is the brush I would use for that. I find I more often use this type of a shader brush than I use this type of a shader brush. So think of this as like everyday putting on your eyeshadow, and this as like precision, more artistic type work, if that makes sense. Now we're getting into brushes that I would recommend for darkening the outer corner of the eye, darkening the inner corner of the eye if you're doing like a halo eye, more precision, but not necessarily just on the eyelid, up into the crease as well. If you're somebody that likes to apply their eyeshadow and then darken the outer corner a little bit, these are the brushes that I would recommend to use for that. So first, I've got a couple of small dome brushes. This one is a little bit fluffier, this one is a little bit denser, but you can see that they're like dome shaped, more flat on the top. This one in particular I use a lot. This is the e.l.f. eye crease brush. I use this to sort of create that outer V on the outer portion of the eye. And I would also use brushes like this in that same way. So these are similar in shape and size. They've got a slight slant to them. So these work really well for applying, again, to that outer corner of the eye, especially because of the slant. You can sort of tilt it in such a way if you want the shadow to sort of come up a bit in like a cat eye sort of shape. This sort of allows you to use the shape of the brush to create the shape that you're looking for on the eye. So angle brushes are the next category. So I've got 3 different sizes here. I've got sort of a small, a medium, and a large shape. So these can be used for a few different things. I have used these to apply winged eyeliner with a gel liner. Sometimes I'll use them in that same way to apply a powder. As opposed to using an eyeliner, I'll use the darkest color in a palette to sort of line the eye. You can also certainly use these for eyebrows. I would recommend a smaller angled brush for the eyebrows, something like that, or something like this. Something like this, in my opinion, is a little bit large for brows. It's a little bit thicker this way, but it is good for getting the eyeshadow right tight to the lash line. So angle brushes are very useful. You can use them in all of those ways. And I also have another brush here that I would use in a similar way, which is a flat topped brush. What is this called? It doesn't have a name. It's just a flat topped brush, but you would use it in the same way. So if you wanted to apply like an eyeliner, if you wanted to cut in along the eyebrow, anything like that where you'd want to have sort of a precise shape, this brush would be useful for. I use this most often for like an eyeliner situation. Then of course we have an eyeliner brush. Looks like this. The only purpose I've ever found for a brush like this is eyeliner. I will use this one quite often to apply gel liner, especially if I just want like a small line and I'm not doing a big wing. I will use a brush like this. Pretty self-explanatory. So another brush category that I find to be very useful is a pencil brush. So I've got a few different shapes and sizes here, but the general sort of vibe here is like pencil shaped, right? So what I like to use these for is the under eye area to smoke out some shadow underneath the eyelash line. I'll also sometimes use these to place just a tiny bit more dark on the outer corner in a very precision manner. Something small like this really allows you to get into those little areas, and you know, sometimes you get all finished your eye look and you look at it and you're like, oh, there's just like a little tiny bald patch right there, you know, in that corner. You can just take the tiniest bit of product on something like this and just dot it on. So I find a brush like this to be very, very useful. These ones are a little bit of a larger version of that same thing. So if you really want to cover a little bit more surface area, really get in underneath and smoke out the lower lash line. I also really like a brush like this for highlighting the inner corner, hitting underneath the eyebrow on the brow bone. Sometimes I like to use a brush like this as opposed to something a little bit flatter like this. It depends on the shadow that I'm using, depends on how shimmery it is. Sometimes that shape just serves me a little bit better, but it is a very useful tool to have in your sort of brush set. Just a couple of categories left. So lip brushes. Quite often in a set of brushes, you'll see lip brushes. So they're just small, flat. Usually they are synthetic bristles, quite stiff to touch because they are made to be used in a precision manner. So I generally don't use these on my lips for myself, but when I'm doing makeup applications on clients, I do make sure that I have lip brushes on hand. If somebody wants a liquid lipstick, or a lipstick. If they want lips done, I'll use a brush like this so that I'm not cross-contaminating in between clients. On myself, I do use these brushes quite often as well for the liquid glitter shadows like the Stila Glitter and Glow, those types of formulas. Sometimes I'll apply them straight on with the doe foot applicator, but more often I'll take a brush like this, sort of scrape some of the product off of the doe foot applicator and then place it on with a brush like this. Just gives you a little bit more control over where it's going, how much is going on. That type of a product is quite wet, so if you get too much on, it can really mess up what you've got on underneath. So that's a good use that I've found for these types of brushes. They also work well if you're putting your lipstick on and you sort of go outside the lines a little bit. You can put a little concealer or a little foundation on a brush like that and touch up around your lip line. They work really well for that. And then lastly, I've got a couple of sort of specialty type brushes. So first of all, we've all seen one of these. It's like the old school eyeshadow sponge that used to come in the single eyeshadows. Do you remember going to the drugstore in your youth like I did? I remember buying like Maybelline single eyeshadows and L'Oreal single eyeshadows, and they always had that little sponge tipped eyeshadow applicator. So I do have one of these. I don't use it a lot, but every once in a while, for like a loose pigment, a loose eyeshadow, something like that, I do like to have a brush like this on hand. And this also works very well for that same thing. So this is the e.l.f. Glitter Eyeshadow Applicator. It's actually made of silicone. This works really well to pick up like a loose pigment and pack it onto the eyelid. It sticks to the silicone really well, as opposed to trying to pick it up on something like this that's a little bit fluffier, where the glitter particles are just going to kind of fall down. This almost attracts the glitter because of the silicone material, and then you can just kind of pack it onto the eyelid. So that's it for brushes. That's all the categories that I could think to sort of break down for you guys. How I use my brushes, what I use them for. I can't think of anything else that I can touch on in terms of brushes just right now. So that's it for me today. That is a quick rundown on brushes. Which ones are used for what? I hope you guys found this helpful. I do get a lot of questions about this. If you have any additional questions about brushes, please comment down below. I will be happy to answer them for you. If there's any other video like this that you would like to see, please let me know. I would be happy to film it for you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did and you found it useful, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.